Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Comics Cube. Today, we are going to be talking about All Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start by talking about what our expectations of the series were when it was first announced. Duy, what were you expecting from it?
Does anyone remember if this came out before or after All Star Batman and Robin?
Before, I want to say it was announced at the same time,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I
but
think
I
when it
think
was
it came out
announced,
before.
I was just like, I wasn't the biggest fan of Frank Quitely's art back then. It took me a while to get used to him because I had limited exposure. Frank draws faces weird, but so I saw the cover of Superman just sitting down. I was like, what is this? That's weird. But then I saw Morrison's name, and of course I was like, the last time I saw Morrison writing Superman was in JLA, and I loved it. And then they said it was going to be Silver Age inspired, which at the time was my favorite era of Superman, at least in terms of the material and the content. Probably not in terms of story quality.
Yeah.
Probably not, but so I was just really excited because at the time I thought that Morrison, and I still think this, I think Morrison is the writer equivalent of Jack Kirby.
Yeah, definitely.
I think they both come up with ideas that maybe some people will refine and execute more on a more polished type of a way, but other than that, in terms of like pure raw ideas, there's a saying that there's no new idea, there's no original idea, everything is just a reworking. With Morrison and Kirby, yes, there are. So, and that's how excited I was.
Kirby and Morrison, it's not just that they're new ideas, but they go big, don't they? Like
Oh
everything
yeah.
is huge on a gigantic scale. Like,
Hmm. Like nothing is small.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about it because like with an artist who comes like that, it's like because Jack Kirby, especially like even with like you don't even have to really get into his splash pages, right? But just like his single panels are like that. There's just so much like power in them, right? Even when characters are standing still, they don't really feel like they're standing still. But then when you get to like a splash page and it's like bow, now how you love that, right? So Grant Morrison does the same thing, and so but he does it as a writer. It's just really interesting, and it's like, hey, listen, we're gonna do this, and then I've heard artists talk about how Grant Morrison will have like for a single panel, he'll just have like this long line of text talk about what the panel is and what it's about, and it's like, man, this is like 2 pages, you know what I mean, just for this one panel, you know. But that's interesting though, because most of the times they'll just be like, hey, here, this was being said here, this is the scenery, set it up like this, and then that's kind of it. But he's more of a he's an artist in that sense, because like he said before that, I draw stuff, but I don't draw well enough to really illustrate my own stories. And that kind of comes in when he's doing the scripts and stuff. It's really amazing to see. And it's funny to say, but it's not when you're talking about comics, because comics are a visual medium. But it's interesting to see a writer who has so much input in what you see on the page. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like generally speaking, it's not like that. But yeah, like in those ideas, even before you see them, it's like it's the same thing. It's like Kirby. It's like bow, you know.
absolutely. I think, like Kirby's kind of like I'm very much of the opinion that Stan's dialogue took Kirby up a notch. It kind of
Mm.
enhanced Kirby and almost made it more accessible. And I think
I
Morrison's the
agree with
same.
that.
I mean,
Yeah,
Morrison's great as Morrison, but if he's with the right collaborator, then he's even better.
yeah,
And that's what happened here with All Star, I
Uh,
think.
yeah.
I do think if Kirby had one flaw, his expressions weren't the best. So when you have a writer like Stan with him, like I think it really does elevate him. With Morrison, gee, who would you say is his perfect collaborator, guys?
It's this guy, isn't it? It's Frank Quitely. Like,
Quite frankly, I'd have to say it's Frank Quitely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Before anybody asks, yes, it is not in fact his real name. It is in fact a pen name. Okay.
So, LaMar, what were your expectations of it at the time when it was first announced?
You know, I didn't really have any, to be honest with you, because once they announced it, and then like Dewey said, once they announced it, and then they were like, yeah, Frank, what's the boy name? Grant Morrison. There you go. Grant, when they announced that Grant Morrison was writing, you know, I was like, okay, I'm there. You know, I'm gonna check it out. It's Superman, and we getting more Grant Morrison Superman, and because he just gets the character in a way that I think he doesn't take Superman for granted as a character, and that's one of the big things about getting him right as a character, right? Yeah. And so, you know, I was like, okay, I'm good on that. I'm straight. I'll be there, you know. But the first thing that I had read with Frank Quitely's art, it was actually the thing they did where the graphic novel they did where Batman, like he goes overseas and he's fighting in the what's the name of it? Paulie, I know you know the name of it.
He's in Scotland, isn't he? I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's over there, and that was the first time I'd ever seen Frank Quitely's art, and I was like, "There's something different about this, but I like it though." So I just bought it sight unseen, and I took it home and I read it. I think that day I read it twice. Like, just I finished it and then went right back and read it again.
Oh,
and
Batman Scottish Connection.
That's the one. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Written by Alan Grant. These names are so confusing. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah, I thought his art was dope, and just the way that he rendered, like, not just the humans, but you know, the scenery and everything. It all kind of worked, you know, because it was just something about it that was kind of quirky, you know. But there's a lot of wild things happening in the story, you know. Just when you're reading it, they don't necessarily seem like it's you know, wild or anything. But when you finish reading it, it's like, hey, this was kind of crazy. But so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna try this, because I had never really seen him draw a character like Superman before, you know, because visually him and Batman are two different things. So I was like, yeah, I got to see how he does this. And I remember when Wizard put out, you know, that 6-page intro, and I was like, all right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I went down to Stories Comics, which is one of the local LCSs here. Shout out to them, because they always been good to me. I've been going there for 20 years. I went in there and I put it in my pull list, and yeah. And when I actually read it, you know, yeah, we'll get to that later. But
yeah.
In contrast, I want to say that my expectations for hearing about All-Star Batman and Robin were, what the hell is this? Your turn, Paul.
I was like excited, but mostly based on Grant Morrison. I had that picture, that Frank Quitely cover of Superman sitting on the cloud as my screensaver in work, my wallpaper in work for a while when it was first announced. That one, yes. And I was really intrigued by that, because I think when it was announced, you had like Morrison's description of him meeting that cosplayer at a convention, and just how the cosplayer just seemed to embody Superman, because he was just really relaxed and nonchalant, and that's how a man who couldn't be hurt by anything would be. You know, he'd be really chilled out, you know, and he wouldn't constantly be posing with his hands on his hips. He'd just be like, yeah, you know, I'm Superman. And I just found that absolutely fascinating, because it was genuinely a version of Superman we'd never heard of before. I wasn't so familiar with Frank Quitely. At that point, I'd read a bit of Morrison and Quitely's X-Men together, and I'd enjoyed it, but I hadn't really sort of, really looked into his art and how it connected with how in sync he is with Morrison. That hadn't really registered at that point. So it was mostly Morrison was the selling point for me. But I was
read Earth 2, JLA Earth 2. They did
I
that.
forgot about that. Yes,
Yeah.
I did read that. But again, even that, I'd enjoyed it, but I hadn't really sort of grasped just how perfect Quietly was for Morrison.
Yeah. I think with me, with Quietly, the expectation for me was I prefer Superman a little bit on the leaner side, Garcia Lopez, Gary Frank, and Frank Quietly's Superman is not on that side. He's quite big. So that's what threw me off a little bit. And that made it perfect when I realized what he was doing with Clark Kent. Because
absolutely.
with Clark Kent, he was the same size, but he was completely different. That actually, yeah. But we'll talk about that.
But I think that's like a perfect example there of something. Yeah, we'll touch on that later. But the way Quietly draws Clark Kent and the way Morrison describes Superman as being really relaxed, it's something that seems really obvious, but no one had done it in the whole, at the time, 70 odd years of Superman's existence, before. So, yeah, it was a good, the fact that we noticed things like that, I think it kind of shows what we were going to get, a little hint of what we were going to get with it.
Yeah.
So how did the experience of consuming this, I mean, did you guys get it monthly? Because I got it monthly, and I have to say, even though I was enjoying it, there were so much gaps between issues, which I'm all for, by the way. I think if they'd rushed it out, it wouldn't have been the fantastic work that stands on its own that it is today. But I mean, at
3
the time,
years to come out with all 12 issues.
Yeah.
there we go. And I think it was like ages between when it was announced and when the first issue came out. It was a couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, LaMar, how did you find the experience of getting it from month to month?
Well, because of the delays and stuff, the way that I did it was I would get the issues and I just wouldn't read them. So I would wait until I got, and I knew it was going to be a 12-issue miniseries. So whenever I'd get 3, I'd read those 3. And then when I got the other 3, I'd read them like that. You see what I'm saying?
That actually cuts up pretty well, actually. If you
Yeah. That was how I did it. And then when I got to the last 3, I started all over again. So I just read them all 1 through 12 like that. I just did it in one sitting, and it actually reads really well both ways, as like a full story and like in parts. And honestly, that's a rarity for like a 12-issue series, because some of them they just read better, when you're just reading them piecemeal versus when you just sit down and read them. Or sometimes it's the other way. But this one is fantastic either way.
It actually works out because the first 3 is like an arc. The next 3 are like solo stories. The next 3 are a 2-part arc and the epilogue to that 2-part arc, and the last 3 are the last 3. So it actually works out.
I mean, it's certainly better than how I read it, because I have no discipline or patience whatsoever. So I read them as issue by issue as soon as I got them, and I don't think I got the full experience.
Because you forgot by the time the next issue came out what had happened.
Yeah, I was like, I have no idea what's going on. And like Morrison, with Morrison stuff, you're straight into the action as soon as you open the issue.
Yeah.
There's no like, in our last episode, we saw this. It's just... you're right into it. So I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I was enjoying it, but I didn't get the full mind-blowing experience until I read all 12 issues in one go. But that's my problem, less than Morrison and Quietly's problem, I think. But Duy, how did you find it?
Well, it started coming out when I was in college, so I didn't have a comic shop nearby. according to Wikipedia, this hardcover, the one that I have, came out January 2007, and I must have been in Washington D.C. So I must have there where I worked. There was a Borders bookstore nearby, so I must have just walked in, saw that it was finally collected, and was like, "Oh, I could finally read this whole thing." So I just bought it. And then I waited, it seems, 2 more years for the next hardcover. By that time, I was back in the Philippines, and so I had a comic shop, so I was just reading that. So I basically read it in 2 goes. I gotta say, I was disappointed by the second one when it came out, and in retrospect, that is only because I waited 2 years for that thing to wrap up. Reading it all in one go these days is such a pleasant experience. The delays really both build up expectation and make you forget what had happened. So
Yeah.
it's just it's got to be that kind of problem's got to be fixed. I don't know how, but I still prefer having the delays rather than fill in artists and everything.
I do too.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. What was the cause for the delays for this one though? I can't remember.
As far as I don't know this for sure, so if anyone's watching that knows different, feel free to correct me in the comments. But I've got a feeling it was quietly,
Okay.
and the detail he puts into it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it was any sort of negligence on his part, but I get the
Mhm.
impression that it's just the sheer work he puts into it. But I
Okay.
remember it kind of it was difficult at the time in the context of how Superman comics were at the time, because everything was delayed at the time. Because around the time All
Everything.
Star was coming out, you had
Mhm.
Richard Donner and Jeff Johns doing Last Son in Action
Yeah.
Comics.
Yeah.
And so that was constantly delayed as well, and you had these fill-in issues that weren't that great in between, and so it was like it was getting delayed in the context of a lot of delays. And it wasn't just the Superman books. I think Infinite Crisis had finished and DC were doing that 1 year later event, and I think there were a lot of delays plaguing them at that time.
Those are my eyes rolling in the back of my head.
And that whole 1 year later thing, it didn't. I mean, everything around Infinite Crisis and the build up to Infinite Crisis. I mean, the whole Dan Didio era, that was the sort of creative peak. I think that they were doing so well, and then afterwards, I think the quality dipped a little bit. And 1 year later, for whatever reason, wasn't as successful as was promised. And so All Star Superman was coming out in the context of that. So I think that maybe affected my experience of it as it was coming out. I don't know. Did that have any impact on
Yeah.
you guys?
It actually made me appreciate All Star because 1 year later pissed me off so much. Because it was like, I was reading JSA and I was reading Titans, and then all of a sudden they jumped and creative team shuffled, and I'm like, what? But these, they had such momentum, and then all of a sudden they're jumping. They're jumping a year. On the other hand, all the Superman titles kind of got a bigger boost, so that was a plus. Of course, the Batman titles were mostly unaffected, as they tend to be with these things. But with Infinite Crisis specifically, you can tell just how bad it got at DC, because that 7th issue, if people reading this who've only ever seen it in hardcover, if you ever see the single issue of Infinite Crisis number 7 and compare it with Infinite Crisis number 7 in the hardcover, you will see how much was rushed just to get that book out. There are whole pages where they just colored the background all red. They had a double page spread by an uncredited artist of all the heroes that was completely and totally redrawn by George Perez for the hardcover. It got pretty bad.
Yeah, because I was bigging up Infinite Crisis there, but I had actually forgotten. Yeah, issue 7 was a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Not just the delays, but the impact the delays were having on the creativity. Like, it was a mess. The last issue of Infinite Crisis as it came out. Like,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
at the time there was kind of a debate because Civil War was going on at the same time. So the question was, do you rush a product out and get all of these fill-in artists like Infinite Crisis did, or do you live with the delays and let it stand on its own as an evergreen product like Civil War with Steve McNiven? And I think time has proven that the second way is probably better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It kind of seems like maybe when you're in the moment, it might be better to get somebody in a slot just to kind of keep things going. But like over time, it don't work out. And what's happening now is because the way stories are decompressed and everything now. So what happens is it's exacerbated even more when you try to fill in people because like almost as soon as it's done, it's like the story's kind of done. Like there's
yeah.
really no reason for you to go back and check it out again because it's just a bunch of stuff, and it really and it affects me personally to the point that when they do things like 1 year later and stuff like that, like I'm not even interested. Like I don't even read that stuff, just because of the experience when they do stuff like this. It's like, yeah, I'm not even interested in that, man. You know what I mean? So it hurts in that way too.
And that's where something like All Star works because it is out of continuity. It is not beholden to the schedule of anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep Frank on the book and let him finish it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
you know, I
Absolutely.
mean, or I mean, if you know that somebody like him who has problems like that, just don't announce the book until he's done,
Yeah.
and then
At
just
least
have
let him
everybody
get
else
six
go
issues
and do
in.
whatever. Huh?
At least let him get
Yeah, yeah.
6 issues in.
Yeah, let him
Yeah.
get half of it in. You know what I mean? Or something. Or just like if you know you to hold up, like, okay, man, you done. Here's your dough. Appreciate it. Now we're gonna have the colorists come in and they're gonna do and all of that. Or just, there's so many different ways to do it now. You don't have to do it that way. So, you don't even have to be in the same office anymore because of the internet and things like that. So it's
Yeah.
like you got to maximize the technology in that way, you know?
Mm.
Frank's so good though. He's so good.
Yeah,
Yes,
he is.
Yeah.
He is, and it's worth the wait. That's the
He
thing.
is worth the
it
wait.
was worth the
Yeah.
wait. Yeah.
I mean, Paul here
And I
has
think,
the absolute edition.
yes, I mean, can you imagine having this, but then it's full of like fill-in issues and some other artists doing some pages, but not all,
It
it would
never
be
gets
terrible.
published as an absolute
Yeah.
edition if that's the case.
Yeah. Heck
Yeah.
no.
Never.
Because hey, Paulie, how much you pay for that? If you don't mind
Uh,
me asking.
I'll be honest with you, I can't remember because it was a Christmas present
Oh,
a
okay.
couple of years ago
Okay.
from my partner, but I don't know. I think they're pretty expensive, aren't they? They're about like
Yeah.
we talking about 70, 80 quid or something, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're looking at, I think, what is it, like $200 here or something
Mm.
like that?
Amazon has it on retail for $100, but it's 77 with the Amazon discount.
See?
So that's
Yeah.
the
See what I'm saying? Yeah. So yeah, if I pay $100 for a book and it got a bunch of that stuff in it, like, yeah, I'm not gonna be happy with that,
Mm.
especially if I've never read it,
Yeah.
because you have people that because of like the collector's market now, like you have people that's all they deal with is like the omnibus books and these editions like the one you just held up, and that's all they collect. So if they've never read the story before and they get it, and it's like, man, it looks beautiful, but I mean, and I get it. I really do. I really do. So it's just like playing the long game like that is always the best.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, there's an absolute Crisis on Infinite Earths. There is no absolute Infinite Crisis. It's got some great artists on it, but it's just
Mhm.
wildly inconsistent in
Yeah,
Mm.
terms of its output.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting actually. Like Infinite Crisis, they didn't just get Perez to change artwork in the collected edition. They actually
Mhm.
changed dialogue in the
Mhm.
collected edition as
I
well. So
know.
Yeah,
Oh well.
yeah.
Well, I don't think they made any changes in All Star with any reproductions, though. It is what it
no,
No,
is.
no, not as far as
yeah.
I know.
Uh-uh.
So I mean, so yeah, I think you're right. It's sort of like I was saying earlier, because All Star was coming out in the context of what was happening with Infinite Crisis and 1 year later, I found it frustrating at the time, but I wouldn't change it,
Yeah.
for anything because you've got this perfect 12-issue story. LaMar, if you were going to describe the sort of elevator pitch, the sort of in a couple of sentences, in a few sentences, you were to describe not just the plot but the vibe of All Star Superman, to someone who'd never heard of it before, what would you say?
Um, I would say, and the reason why I would say it like this because I've actually done this and it works, right? Because I usually like I talk to a lot of people who they're into like world literature and things like that. So those people tend to read all sorts of things, and so I'd be like, okay, the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? You read like the stories in about the labors of Hercules and all of that stuff, right? And you can just kind of go on and go on and go on, right? And it's like you love it, right? It's dope, right? All-Star Superman, right
Yeah.
there. You know what I mean? And I've done it, and people are like, oh my gosh. And these are people that don't even really like Superman like that. Because one of the things that Grant Morrison does in here, people always say Superman's not relatable because he can do anything, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
how is that not relatable? Because
Mm.
if somebody could swoop down out the sky and solve your problems, like you can't relate to that. You've never felt like that before, number one. But number two, he takes this idea and he's like, see, all of y'all who say this kind of stuff, how Superman's boring because he can do everything. He does everything in this book, and it's great. So, like, what are you talking about? This book, you can't say that this book is boring, you know. And so, even people who don't like Superman and feel that way, I give them this book, and they're like, yeah. That was hot. I got to give it to you. That was hot. So I've never heard anybody walk away from it feeling that way about Superman after reading that story. So yeah, that's how I would do it.
Mm.
I think for me, if you want to really say Superman is boring, Superman isn't interesting, I can understand it if you really equate interesting with like psychological neuroses or whatever, like Batman or whatever.
Yeah.
But the solution to that is to make everything around Superman interesting.
Yeah.
Which All-Star Superman does.
Yeah, in a big way.
In a big way. It takes these Silver Age ideas and modernizes them, takes them up to 11. That's what it is. So if you don't find Superman interesting in it, guarantee everything around him still is. Although I do think Superman is interesting. So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've pretty much summed up what I would say, both of you, with the mythic aspect, but also what you said, turning up it to 11, Duy, because there's a bit in Grant Morrison's Batman run where Bruce Wayne describes himself, he's just fought an alpha male, and he's saying, well, he hasn't met me before, I'm an alpha male plus. And that's kind of like Morrison's thing. You'll take everything up a notch. So it's not just Batman, it's Batman and then some. And in this case, in All-Star Superman, he's taking those sort of Silver Age tropes of DC Comics and Superman mythology, and then he's bringing it into the modern day and then pushing it towards the future as well. So it's Superman plus, everything's got that extra little thing. And I've said this before, but the perfect example for me is how he handles Bizarro. Like, he takes the idea of Bizarro, an imperfect duplicate of Superman, who's got his own cube-shaped planet full of imperfect Superman duplicates, and he takes that idea and then takes it to the next level by creating an imperfect duplicate of Bizarro. And an imperfect duplicate of Bizarro wouldn't be just a perfect copy of Superman. It would be something completely different again. And he's got this character called Zibaro, who's really sensitive, where Bizarro is really crass and monstrous. So you've got this poor imperfect duplicate of an imperfect duplicate living on this cube-shaped planet full of like these Philistines and monsters, and he's just writing this sensitive poetry there. And it's like, it takes an absolute genius just to knock that idea up a notch again, and he does that all the way through the book. It's amazing.
I love that idea because it reminds me of Superman and Captain Marvel and Marvel Man, Miracle Man, because how Miracle Man is a ripoff of Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is a riff on Superman. You wouldn't say Miracle Man is a riff on Superman, but
Right.
No.
so
Yeah.
so it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also with Zabaro, the temptation to make him evil, to make him betray Superman in that story, it's right there. It's so easy, and they don't go for it, and it's so satisfying that they don't go
Yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He sort of betrays him, just through incompetence, doesn't he? Because
Yeah.
doesn't he blow out the flame on the rocket or something by complete accident or
Mhm.
something? And he's like beating himself up about it, like, what have I done, Superman? I'm so sorry. And it's a real contrast with Superman, who is just like, knows exactly what to do all the time. Like,
He's still really calm in the face of impending doom.
yeah, yeah. And Superman's very much, it's like, Zabaro, don't worry, we've got this. Like,
So good.
um, yeah. So on that subject, I mentioned Zabaro there. What other aspects of this story are your favorites? Do
Uh, well, I mentioned Clark Kent, so I the way Christopher Reeve does Clark Kent is not. No one's ever really been able to do it again, where he's goofy and clumsy and klutzy, whereas Superman is, of course, like the perfect person.
Mhm.
But the way quietly draws Clark Kent, it just completely sells it. I think Gary Frank, the way he does it, also does it quite well. But I think there's something to quietly that makes it more believable that Clark Kent isn't Superman. And the thing that really makes that really cool is the fact that quietly's Clark Kent actually still saves lives under the
Mhm.
pretense of being a bumbling idiot. So I really like
Mm.
that one. Um, and my favorite issue out of the whole thing, and that's just because I'm a sap. This is the page that turned me completely around on Quietly's art. I mentioned I didn't really get the appeal of his art. This is the page that turned me around on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as you all know, I'm a big Lois Lane fan, so uh, I'm very happy about that. Would you guys?
Well, yeah, we'll go back to Lois in a minute, I think, because I think
Yeah,
she deserves a
of
discussion
course.
in itself. But LaMar, what was your favorite issue and/or aspect of the series?
Um, it's hard, man. It's really, really hard to narrow it down. But so I'll just go with the first thing that pops into my mind. Going back to what we were talking about the mythology. There's a part in the story where Superman meets all of these guys that are like from these different eras and stuff, and basically they're like the Superman of their era, and they come
Atlas and
in.
Samson, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's dope because these guys are just kind of like, they're like really cocky, and they're like, yeah, man, let me go put this work in real quick, right? And then they meet Superman, and he's just kind of like, okay, let's do this and get it over with or whatever, right? Because he's always like, I got better things to do than this. So then, like in the arm wrestling, thing or whatever that they were doing, and so and it's like when they're in the midst of that, they're both kind of like, hey man, who is this guy, right? You know what I mean? And so I just thought that was really interesting, the way that they played off of one another, and it goes back to what Dewey was talking about when he said like they took it up a notch. So like even within that story, Superman himself is the representation of taking it up a notch, because everybody knows, Samson and Atlas and those guys, and we grew up hearing stories about them and reading the literature and even variations like in cartoons and things like that, and even in the comics. So um for those, just to have that, and you see that this meeting of the in a lot of ways there's a meeting of these literary worlds, you know and it's interesting because ultimately, um, a people's mythology is, you'll see how they see themselves, and you'll see what means something to them when you look at their mythology, because in a lot of ways, whatever people are, you'll see it attested to in the mythology. And so I'm not one of these people who thinks that mythology is not important. It is, and in a lot of ways, mythology is just as important as history. In some cases, it can be even more important than history. So just being able to see that and have it worked out on the page like that, with like Superman being the modern representation of what they are, is just really, really interesting. So in a way, those characters have the same interaction with Superman that we do. And that's the interesting thing about it. Yeah, I just love that. And how, and Frank Quitely, even though his drawing style is really quirky, he's perfect for a book like this because of, just the way that he rendered those scenes and stuff. It's amazing.
Let me tell you something else. One of the reasons that I loved the Silver Age version of Superman is because I was always resistant to the idea that was introduced in '86 that Superman has to be powered down in order for him to work. I always hated that idea. I was always against it. So when you see something like All-Star Superman, where he is clearly very incredibly powerful at the time, 2006, I was like, I knew it. See, you don't need to power him down. And what happens here, he still has to fight insane threats that are dangerous to even him. So the idea that he has to be powered down, completely disproven by this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think with me, there's so many things I love about this book, but I'm going to talk about an aspect of it that I've only just really thought about and noticed recently, and that's the ending of the book, where Luthor ends up seeing the world how Superman sees it. And Luthor describes it as, because he steals Superman's powers, but an unknown byproduct of this is that he ends up seeing the world how Superman sees it. And just the very act of seeing the world how Superman sees it is enough to make Luthor good. It's enough to dispel any sort of murderous impulses and ambition that Luthor's got. And I only just realized recently that what Luthor describes is a very sort of 60s idea, because Luthor describes how we're all linked and we're all one and everything's connected. And when you're Superman, you can see these connections between everything, and you can see how beautiful and linked everything is. And it was only recently I realized that this sounds like someone, Morrison even, talking about the experiences they've had on acid and on LSD. And it's something that you hear about a lot in the 60s. I mean, I've never taken anything like that myself. No judgment if anyone has, of course. But reading about the 60s and about bands like the Beatles.
Nor would we mention it here on YouTube.
Yeah, no, not at all. But when you read about bands like the Beatles in the 60s and the whole sort of hippie movement, that was the thing they were saying. They were saying, like, everyone should be taking this. Everyone should be taking acid because it allows you to see the world in this way. And if everyone was taking this drug, then everyone would see this world in this way, and they wouldn't want to hurt each other, and they wouldn't want to be violent and all this. Yeah. And so it's very interesting that Morrison is writing a 60s version of Superman, a Silver Age Superman.
Yeah.
But he's using an aspect of that era that was never touched on in the 60s Superman comics, the whole kind of hippie ideal. And then he's bringing it and making it this futuristic vision of things. And I only just realized that recently, how tied to the 60s that idea was. And I just thought it was remarkable and just really, really clever. So again, this idea of he's got 60s Superman, he's taking 60s Superman up a notch.
That is really clever. I would even venture to say that that might be completely unintentional.
Hmm.
But it doesn't matter because I believe in death of the author. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's a great reading of it actually. That's 60s
yeah.
Superman with 60s mentality or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah,
I
it's
think in some ways, even the color palette in certain scenes speaks to that.
mm,
You know, because you think of all these like vibrant colors, and they're kind of like not quite pastel and not quite dark. They're somewhat in between, and the colors kind of vibrate almost. You know, when you think about like the stuff that was going on in the '60s and stuff, you would see that kind of stuff everywhere, in advertisements and things like that. Even like if you want to do a retro, like modern rendering of something retro from the 60s, you're going to see that color palette like that. So, you see it somewhat in the books in certain scenes and stuff. So that and like you said, it could be unintentional, but it's there, you
It
know?
is there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of colors, shout out to Jamie Grant, colorist for this book. This is literally the second and third page. Look at that. Look at that.
Smashed it. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, that's one of the greatest Superman images. Like that's a classic, you know.
Yeah.
It really, really is. Yeah.
A little sort of side thing.
I'm just gonna say, it just now hit me that this book starts and ends with him in the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Morrison's very big on that sun god reading of Superman, isn't he?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Like I think he refers to Superman as a sun god in the subtitle for Super Gods, doesn't he? His book.
yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
But
Um,
I just want to point out, I have intellectualized that the book starts with him in the sun and ends with him in the sun, but I don't think I've ever thought it starts and ends with him in the sun. It's like, oh yeah, okay.
I mean, there's an argument to be said that all every time Morrison writes Superman, he's writing his own distinct version of Superman because Final Crisis, DC 1 Million, his JLA run, All Star Superman, they all kind of link up into their own thing, don't they? I mean, Superman Prime from DC 1 Million appears in All Star Superman. So you've almost got your own little Morrison verse when you're talking about Superman. But again, this is me being really nerdy and fanboyish. And I think the best way of reading All Star Superman is just seeing this is Superman,
I agree.
So I
I
think I just went
agree.
off a
It's the
tangent there.
same way for me. Wait, time out. Am I on a delay?
I don't think so.
Yeah, you were at first, but now you're not. Like
Okay.
when you first came back in, there was a slight delay, but now you're good.
All right. So I think for me it was awesome that they used Solaris and the Superman of the 853rd century in this one, because it does give me
Mhm.
that kind of vibe that it just continues the Morrison verse. It's the same
Mhm.
again, very similar to Kirby. Um, if you read Kirby's Thor and then jump to Kirby's New Gods, it makes complete sense.
Right.
It so it's very similar. And the fact that Superman 1 million, that this you could say this is probably the origin of Superman Prime from Superman 1 million in DC 1 million. That to me was this a very cool fanboy thing. But of course, if you knew
Mhm.
none of that, it wouldn't matter. It's still a cool story.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the story
Absolutely.
don't depend on it that being the case. Yeah.
So
Most
let's
people,
take
I would even wager that most people who have read this story don't know about that other story.
hmm,
Right?
and that's perfectly
It's
okay.
perfectly
Like,
fine.
Mhm.
I would never say, "Oh, you have to read DC 1 Million to truly appreciate All Star Superman." I like doing that voice, by the way.
I don't even think that you'd need to be familiar with Silver Age Superman tropes.
No,
I will
not at all.
say that I think this is a love letter to Superman. So if you if you are already a Superman fan, you are way more predisposed to liking it, as opposed to maybe some Superman stories where if you're a Superman fan, you're more predisposed to not liking it because that's how fans work.
Mm.
but this one, I think I think it works both ways, and if you're already a fan, it just makes you love the character more.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So let's take each. Duy was talking earlier on about like the world around Superman and how Morrison made that equally interesting as Superman. Let's talk about each character in turn. So we'll talk about Jimmy, Lois, Luthor, and so on. So let's start with Jimmy. What are your thoughts on Jimmy in this story, LaMar?
You know, Jimmy seems out of all of the Superman supporting characters, he seems to be the one that like gets kind of pushed to the side and or treated like fodder of some sort, right? When you know, like, but you
I
know,
mean,
for me,
sure, but Lana Lang is barely in this book, so okay.
yeah, well, yeah, listen, we're not even gonna go there with that, right? But you know, he's like the one that's like, you know, people like treat him almost like he's doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't matter if he's there sometimes. So it's like, well, we gotta have him, so you know, we'll put him in here. And that's, you know, or you know, there's been some stories where he's been murdered, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we're not gonna get into that. But you know, it's like I think this book does a really good job of showing why he's important as a character because for he's like I'm trying to think of how I can put it. He's like a street level character, but he's not edgy, right? Like he's not going around shoving trash can lids down people's throats and things like that. But when people think about street level characters, that's what they think about. But Jimmy, he's not that at all. He's the guy with the camera. So when Superman is up high, he's underneath taking the images, and so he sees Superman the way that we would see Superman, right? So from that particular vantage point, in a lot of ways he's like a combination between like a street level character and like a wish fulfillment type thing because he's best friends with Superman. So it's like if you can't be Superman, what's the next best thing? You know, like being his buddy. Like, you know, or like you bring it up to now, like, you know, he could text Superman if he wanted to, right? You know, like that's, you know, for somebody who, you know, if Superman was a real person, like you know how many points you're going to get for that when you go to school or something, you go to work, be like, hey, look what Superman texted me this morning. You're a wild boy. You know what I mean? So you know I think that they did a really good job of conveying that in this book. And you know, this book and in Secret Origin too is another book they were really they did really they did right by Jimmy. So like that timeless element that he has as a character, you know, you really get that in this book.
Hmm. So, Duy, what do you think about Jimmy in this book?
Well, Jimmy Olsen traditionally and historically is not a cool guy. And I think that's kind of the point. I think he's supposed to be kind of the gateway to a lot of the fans into this
Mm-hmm.
world.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's the dude wearing the bow tie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But and I think that Morrison was able to add a kind of a cool factor to Jimmy without really changing who Jimmy is. And I think that's pretty amazing, you know? Like
Yeah.
you get to the core of the character where he just wants to have adventure,
Mm-hmm.
wants to prove that in a character like that, you have to kind of prove that you're worthy of being Superman's pal. And he proves that he's worthy of being Superman's pal. He's he's just and he takes matters into his own hands. He's smart. Um, Still dating Superman's girlfriend's sister, which to me is kind of weird, but there's a level of obsession that goes on with, with this. But and the fact that I do think that his solo issue, the issue that focuses on him, is probably the weakest of the book.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, that is a pretty high bar. Like the weakest issue of this book is still a pretty strong issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely. really interesting in this book myself because it was written in like 2005, 2006, I guess.
Mhm.
Morrison and Quietly must have been making it, and Jimmy's essentially a YouTube star. He's a YouTube celebrity, and YouTube was only created in 2005.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's pretty amazing. And if you think about it, Jimmy in the Silver Age was he's a celebrity, but he's also a celebrity who's on the periphery of even bigger celebrities, and that's kind of what YouTube personalities sell themselves as today. It's like, hey,
Mhm.
I'm just like you. I'm a guy with a camera, but I can go and live in a mansion. I can go and talk to these famous people, and I can make money off just doing things on YouTube. And that's kind of what like Jimmy was almost in the Silver Age. He was like the reader, but he was just it's just an ordinary little kid. But he was mates with Superman, and he could have all of these adventures just because he was mates with Superman. But he was essentially just a kid with a camera or a
Mhm.
notepad, because of course he wasn't a photographer yet in the Silver Age. But and like a YouTube celebrity in the Silver Age, Jimmy had his own fan club. And something that I always find really interesting is like, imagine if instead of joining the Superman fan club, you were one of the people who joined the Jimmy Olsen fan club. But that's kind of
Why
what's happening.
would you?
Yeah, but I speak to you. I mean, I think that. Why would you? But I speak to my niece and nephew now, and they don't want to be like movie stars. They don't want to be like famous scientists or whatever. They don't want to be like super celebrities. They want to be YouTube stars. You know,
Because it's
and
accessible. I see it. It's
yeah,
accessible.
because
They see a path
it's
doing it.
yeah, it's got this illusion of being more obtainable. And so that's why someone would conceivably admire Jimmy, I think, because they would see themselves. And so
Mhm.
Morrison kind of recognized this and made Jimmy this sort of prototype YouTube star. And I've banged on about this before to you guys, so I'm apologizing now for going over the same thing again. But Morrison based the character of Jimmy on this in All Star on Nathan Barley, which I find really interesting because Nathan Barley was a sitcom from 2005 about a British sitcom on Channel 4 written by Charlie Brooker and Chris Morris. And it was about a man who lived in London and made videos of stupid pranks and him doing silly stuff and put it on the internet. And he was always like wanted to be, starting the next big fashion trend and all this. And he always got this money that you didn't know what came from that he just wasted on this pursuit of like internet fame, but fame for doing nothing of worth really. And Nathan Barley was a YouTube star before YouTube was a thing. That this sitcom came out in 2005, the same year YouTube began. So Charlie Brooker and Chris Morris, when they wrote this sitcom, they predicted the rise of the YouTube celebrity. And in the same way, by basing Jimmy on Nathan Barley and making that connection to Silver Age Jimmy, Morrison kind of predicted the rise of the YouTube star with Jimmy as well. So I find that really interesting. And again,
That
in the
is
context of taking the 60s idea and pushing it up a notch. Yeah. So I like
very
Jimmy.
interesting. Yeah.
Oh, before we go any further, this is this episode's iteration of what that mean. Paulie, you said you was banging on about something. What that mean?
Oh, sorry. Just going on about it, repeating
Got you. So
myself
like
and just
rambling or something.
rambling. Yeah. So
Okay, all right. We
because
got
I
it.
know
Okay,
I've
continue.
spoken about Nathan Barley and Jimmy Olsen to you guys before, so
Yeah. We've had that conversation before. Yeah. We appreciate it. Okay, we continue.
So that's Jimmy. What about Lois? Duy, how do you feel about Lois in this book?
I'm a little mixed on it because I love Lois Lane, and I think that a lot of her depiction here is amazing. The third issue is my favorite issue, where it's her birthday and Superman surprises her with superpowers and stuff. And at the end, they kiss on the moon, and she's like, "Why me?" And he goes, "There's got to be something that I just can't help." having said that, I am completely against the idea that Lois Lane would not figure out that Clark Kent is Superman, especially in a comic that was published in 2006.
Right.
And the fact that it's a really good thing that Grant and Frank are really good at what they do, because the way that they handled Superman revealing himself to Lois and then her refusing to admit it, the way they handled it was really charming. So I can buy it because it was really charming. See, that's the thing. You can make me buy stuff if you're good at what you're doing. But as a premise on its own, it's just, why wouldn't she believe him? And having said that, Jimmy Olsen absolutely knows that Superman is Clark Kent in this book.
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because you get the impression that all of the planet know that he's Superman. All the planet staff, except Lois.
Except Lois. And
LaMar,
maybe Steve Lombard.
Yes, and maybe Steve Lombard.
Who's in denial.
Just want to add as well that I love that Steve Lombard's in this, because I love the character of Steve Lombard.
And you know what else? This iteration of Steve Lombard, they ended up using this in the main DC universe.
Yeah, the tash, yeah. And the toupee and all that, yeah, and the sort of aging. I suppose he was always a kind of aging football jock, wasn't he? But they really kind of made that more explicit in All Star.
Yeah. The wannabe Tom Selleck.
Yes, I can relate to that.
Yeah. I'm with Dewey on this one. I thought that the way that they handled Lois, everything else, I thought was fly, and the way that they approached it and stuff. But like the reveal, like you said, if it had been another book, I wouldn't have bought it. You know what I mean? But I guess that probably was the point. You know what I mean? Because Morrison understands Lois enough to know what he can do and what he can't do, right? But just in a general sense, if anybody tells me that, like, let's just say that the whole stuff with them getting married and all of that happened right before he died and all of that in the 90s, let's just say that didn't happen, and for the next 30 years or so, they still carried on like they carried on before that, with her not knowing who he was. At this point in time, there would be no way pretty much for that to be plausible, because number one, and the main reason why, it's not even the technology and stuff. The main reason why is Lois is too smart for that.
Yeah.
She's too good at her job.
Honestly, she was too smart for it in the 60s, which is why she was always trying to prove he was Superman.
She always has been. That's exactly my point. She always has been. Like, you would think that at a certain point, she would, after experiencing this dude and encountering him on and off, and Clark is a guy that she works with. Like, every single day she's talking to him. She probably spends more time with him and Perry and Jimmy than she does with her own family. Yeah. So, at some point, this man would just be like in a mirror somewhere adjusting his tie or something. And she'd be like, you know what? Let me tell you about yourself right now, Superman. You know what I mean? Like, that would have had to have happened at some point in time, right? But yeah, if you were gonna play it, like if you were gonna play up that angle in a story, because like you said, in the 60s, that was still kind of a thing. And I guess that's probably what they were trying to do, to kind of like deal with it a little bit and then move past it. I guess this is probably the best way to do it with all of the other stuff that was happening. But like you said, it has to be set up with what's happening in the story first. Like, it just can't come out of nowhere. And honestly, with the Lois in this book, it couldn't be taken for granted. And I think that that's really a testament to how well he understands Lois, because, you could make a argument for Lois Lane being the greatest comic book character ever invented. You can make a really good argument for that. You know what I mean? And so somebody like that can't constantly be playing these little dumb, it's like she's written a lot in the 60s
games.
Yeah, she's like the butt of the joke, and she's the damsel in distress, right?
Yeah.
And that's just insane. But to bring it into the modern day, at least they did play down the damsel in distress stuff because there's not a lot of that in here, and it's just them kind of having a moment, and the reveal serves the moment of like of her doing what she does or whatever, in regard to and what Superman does, and then this whole thing about her birthday and all of that, so it serves a greater purpose, but that's not even like the biggest part of it. It's just kind of like something that you just kind of had to deal with because apparently she didn't know who he was, so they just kind of had to deal with it, so it was kind of like, oh, and by the way, boom, 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 so because it's like you said, we know it's like a book that's based in the 60s, and that's what was going on in the 60s, as stupid as it was. That's what was going on. So I guess if you're going to deal with it, that's the way to deal with it, or you could go the cliched route and be like, man, look, I already knew who you was, all along. You ain't fooling nobody. That would kind of be uneventful in a story like this, because it's not really played on the street level like that, So it makes sense, and that's almost like in some ways Lois is also representative of the people reading the book in certain moments, but it's different than Jimmy because it's really fleeting,
Yeah.
and then she gets the superpowers for 24 hours, you know what I mean, and then that's when the wish fulfillment stuff comes in,
My favorite part about her getting superpowers for 24 hours is she ends up fighting no one.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like that would be like us if we got superpowers for 24 hours. Like, oh, well, let's go fight. And then 24 hours will have passed and it'll be like, all right, then.
Because she's literally sitting there and watching Superman arm wrestle these guys at one point. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm such a sap. So the ending where, he's like, I only have moments to save the world. And she goes, that's all you've ever needed. And he goes like, I love you, Lois Lane, until the end of time. That he flies away, which was perfectly replicated in the animated movie with written by Dwayne McDuffie.
Yeah.
Really? I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I thought the animated movie was a little, they cut out a lot of stuff. They cut out the whole thing in the Bizarro world. So that was, but it could have been expanded more. But that moment with the blaring music in the back, is just beautiful, beautiful. I love it.
I find what he did with Lois in this story, Morrison, I mean, incredibly brave.
Yeah.
Because I get the feeling that Morrison sat down and thought, okay, if I'm doing this Silver Age ideal of Superman, you've got a Lois who doesn't know he's Superman. So why would an intelligent woman like this not realize that he's Superman? And the answer he comes up with is all tied in with Lois's prejudices and the ugly side of Lois's personality, and it comes out after she's exposed to that gas or whatever in the fortress, and you're kind of like you see Lois saying like, I didn't want to admit that someone as clumsy and imperfect as Clark Kent could be an aspect of the personality of this man I love. And she's really horrified by that aspect of herself. And that's really sort of brave to take that explanation for that aspect of this character in like only the second issue you're seeing her in, This is issue 2, this unfolds. And something else that they both do quietly in Morrison, you never see like gas spraying into her face or radiation beaming on her. You never see her get exposed to this thing. So Superman could be lying about, oh, yes, you've gone all paranoid because you were exposed to this. You never see her getting exposed to anything. So Superman could just be saying that to make
To
her feel
appease
better.
her.
And that's really brave because Lois is still sympathetic. Lois, you still like Lois, even though you've just had this really ugly side of her revealed to you, and she's had this ugly side of her revealed to herself. And a lesser writer couldn't have handled that, but I think Morrison does. So I think that's pretty amazing. And again, it feeds into this idea of Lois is very human. She's
Yeah.
She's the best reporter in the world. She's a really good person, compassionate person, but she has this kind of mean girl side to her as well that's been there since Action Comics #1.
Yeah.
And and you see it in Superman the movie in Kidder's description, where
She's what
she
grounds him to us,
yeah,
the reader.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If
she's flawed like
like
us,
like you always said in our Superman the movie discussion, if Lois can accept him, it can believe in him, then therefore so can we, because she is a cynical person.
Exactly, yeah. And also at the same by the same token, if Superman can love Lois, then he can love us as well, because Lois is at the same time, the best and the worst of us as well, because she's so human like. So and I always thought that Lois and Luthor are really tied to each other in that respect, in that they are
Yes.
both representatives of humanity
Mhm.
and what Superman thinks of humanity, which brings us.
Wait, time out. I just want to say
Yeah.
everything that we mentioned about what they did with Lois, the brilliant thing, it just hit me now. The brilliant thing that they did with it was that they did it early on in the series. If they did
Yeah.
it later on in the series, we might not have bought it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
by doing it before we could get completely and fully immersed into the series, it works.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which brings us
to the greatest villain of all time. And I honestly think this is the greatest depiction of Lex Luthor I've ever seen. This is my favorite Lex Luthor out of all the depictions of Lex Luthor.
the greatest criminal mind of our time.
The greatest criminal mind of our time. And what kind of sums him up so well for me is, and again, it's a little parallel with Lois again, because I think they're both tied to each other in such a fundamental way. Clark takes his glasses off and literally shouts in Luthor's face in issue 5, and Lex cannot see that he's Superman. In the same way, that Lois's prejudices were stopping her seeing that Clark was Superman, Luthor's prejudices won't allow him to see Superman as Clark. But the difference is, of course, Lois overcomes those prejudices, and Luthor is incapable of doing it. And it's just so wonderful, just this idea. And there's so much going on in issue 5 that tells you so much about Luthor, like the idea that at the beginning of the issue, he points out to Clark Kent that his eyebrow is a Superman swirl, and he says, "Oh, people all over men all over the world unconsciously style their eyebrows in that way without realizing it because they want to emulate Superman." And of course, the joke at that time is that Clark is Superman and Luthor doesn't realize. But then later on in the issue, Luthor's lost one of his eyebrows because he paints them on, and one of them's rubbed off, and he draws an eyebrow on and gives himself a really noticeable Superman swirl, without realizing it. So he's doing it too. And that just says so much about the character to me. So I love Luthor in this. And of course, we've talked about the ending already, where he finally sees the world in the way that Superman does. And that's all it takes for him to change his ways. Duy, what do you think of Luthor in this series?
I think issue 5 says a lot about Luthor because, Luthor traditionally has never been depicted as a physically fit person. And in this point in time, when this book was coming out, he was rather portrayed as an older gentleman who was not in the perfect shape. So the fact that they showed him working out and he's fit and he's buff, so he really was working on becoming a bigger, more fit version of himself. So Lex, it works out. He's trying to prove that he's the perfect human, and all that. But at the same time, all of the stuff with the jailbreak and the parasite, it's all happening, and it's this brilliant issue where Clark um, does all of these Superman things and hides it from everyone. He stomps on the ground and he's like, "Oh no, it's an earthquake." And Lex Luthor, in his ego, absolutely, completely believes that he has saved himself. He is incapable of thinking that it could be fate, it could be luck, or it could in fact be Superman, even when Superman is shouting in his face at the end of the issue.
Yeah.
That's
It
amazing.
is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. LaMar, what do you think of Luthor in this series?
um, you know what the amazing thing about it is for me is that pretty much all of the aspects of Luther and the way that he's been depicted over the years, they're all in this issue in some kind of way, right? So when you first see him, he's like Luthor, like he's like what I would call a paper gangster, right? So like he understands the businessman stuff and all of that enough to where, you know, he puts people in these situations using contracts and things that benefit him and don't benefit them. You know, like he's just one of those kind of people like that. And then um on the next page and stuff, or the subsequent pages, you see the mad scientist Lex Luthor with the face shield on, and he's, you know, he's got this ray gun, and he's, you know, and all of this. So as you go through the issue, and then you have the Luthor that like is in, like you said, he's wearing the orange jail suit, and he's working out, and you know, and then you have all of these depictions because, you know, he was depicted like that when he had like the clone body in the 90s and he was playing his son, you know, and then he found out, yeah, this is just Lex in the joint or whatever. You know, so you have all these different iterations of Lex Luthor. And it's like you said, this guy is like, he still believes that like he saved himself, or, you know, and that it's all him because everything's got to be him. So what happens is, by the time, and he's so like immersed in himself, like Dewey said, by the time he gets to the end of it and Superman standing in his face screaming at him and his glasses are off, and he still doesn't realize it's Superman because he's so engrossed in what he perceived he did, you know. So it speaks a lot to his mentality, right? That it's like, dude, Superman screaming at you and you don't even realize it, right? Because you're so wrapped up in who you project, who you are, you know. But you know, people with insecurities do that, you know. So it's really really interesting. It's an interesting issue, and how you see all these different sides of Luthor that we've seen in movies and in the comics and in you know, on TV and things like that. And yeah, I think this might be my favorite version of Lex because he's
Mm.
kind of all of him. You know what I mean? And I know that might seem like a cheat, but it really, really is like, and Morrison did it in a single issue. Like he toed that line, and none of them seem inappropriate because there are aspects of who he is, and it's really easy for him to just like take the leap, like, you know, like, I'm a villain, this is what I do, I don't want to be a hero, right? So if I want to be a businessman and do nasty stuff, you know, to the city and to the environment and all of that, or I want to run for political office, I'm going to do that. If I want to come down here and make a death ray or a giant suit of armor, I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna make it myself. I'm not gonna allow anybody to help me. If anybody comes in and I don't want them there, I'm gonna snap their neck because I've been working out, right? So
Because I've been working out.
you know what I mean? So, you know, it's almost like, it's like you're in a room. It's like you're in this Lex Luthor labyrinth, and when you go around a corner, there's a different Lex Luthor waiting there for you. And then you go around another corner and another corner, and there's a different one, but
Yeah.
they're all the same guy. It's really, really interesting. And to be able to do it, and I'm a single issue guy. I always have been. So to be able to get an issue like this where you explore all of Lex Luthor's personality traits and you do it in one issue, that's absolutely crazy. You know what I mean? And to do it in a book like this is crazy. And have it stick, you know, and make it work. It's in the universe that he's crafted here. And you know, at no point am I taken out of the story by some of what most people would consider to be like mundane elements of Luthor's personality, but they're really not, like what you're talking about the eyebrow and stuff,
Mhm.
you know. But like, who would think to do that? Like, just the idea that Lex Luthor draws his eyebrows on, because he's like completely bald. You know what I mean? He's not just bald on his head. His whole head is bald. And his
Surprised he
face.
doesn't draw
Yeah.
hair on himself. I think it's and I also think it says a lot about Lex that he's working with people like his niece Nostalgia, who he's grooming to be, the next him.
Yeah.
And he's also working with Solaris, the tyrant son.
Yeah.
So, guy's got his hands in a lot of pots.
Yeah.
Very ambitious. That's what makes him the greatest criminal mind of our time.
What I love about Luthor in this story as well is that there's always that aspect of Luthor in other Superman stories that, he's kind of got a point. And this is an aspect of Superman that's been explored ever since the 70s. Superman could be holding humanity back in a way. It's not good. And you see this in real life too. It's not good to put anyone on a pedestal and rely on any one person to save you. You've got to be able to take responsibility for yourself. And I think we're seeing this in politics, as with the rise of people like Trump. People want to project all their hopes and dreams onto one person, and it's a very dangerous path to go down, and it's a very sort of fine line that Superman straddles as a character. But with All-Star Superman, you've got the character of Leo Quintin, who's supposed to be the potential of human beings. That he's almost like a sort of good version of Luthor, in that he's what happens when Superman inspires human beings to greatness. When Superman inspires humanity to achieve wonderful, fantastic, amazing things off their own back. And so I think that character is really important there, because Leo Quintum's an answer to a criticism of Superman that someone like Luthor might have, that Superman holds back human potential, because he very much hasn't done it. And Leo Quintum is a great example of that. And what makes Leo Quintum so interesting in that regard is that many people interpret him as Luthor.
Yeah.
There's a fan theory on the internet that at the end of All-Star Superman, after seeing the world in the way Superman sees it, Luthor goes back in time and becomes Leo Quintum. So What do you guys think? Do you think...
Let's look at the evidence, right? So this is Leo Quintum in issue 1. This is Leo Quintum in issue 1. Okay? This is Lex Luthor in issue 1.
Yeah.
Lex Luthor has a monkey named Leopold, which can be shortened to Leo. At the end of issue 12, when Clark removes his glasses and, turns into Superman, Lex goes, well, now that's an idea. And is he referring to, what is he referring to? Is he referring to Clark putting on glasses and changing his hair and posture to put on a disguise? And what does Lex Luthor know how to do at the end of the series? He knows how to duplicate Superman's DNA, which is something that Leo Quintum knows how to do already. And I'm not saying yes and I'm not saying no, but I do think it is interesting. The idea that Leo Quintum is Lex Luthor after Superman has inspired him, because it is kind of weird to think that virtually every other character in this book is a pre-existing character. I guess Bar-El and his wife, what's her name?
I can't remember.
So Bar-El and Lilo. You'd think I would remember Lilo more than Bar-El. But Bar-El and Lilo are new. But I mean, the template of that kind of character has always been around. You could easily have named that Zod and Ursa if you wanted to. Zabaro's not new, but it's a natural extrapolation. Zabaro is new, but it's a natural extrapolation of Bizarro. And I guess Nostalgia is new, so maybe I'm talking out of my ass. But
No, not at all. I see exactly what you're saying, because just like Zabaro, there's an argument to be said that Leo is a natural extrapolation of Luthor.
yes, so Leo Quintum. I don't know. Like I don't want to answer that conclusively, but I do think it is interesting that he could be. I think it's interesting enough that they could be parallel. In the movie, they are explicitly separate people, but in the comic, I think it does. I think it is interesting enough that they parallel each other. Might even be more interesting if he actually is Lex.
What do you think, LaMar?
You know, I think for me, I'd almost expect that to be the case. I don't need it confirmed for me, because I feel like, if you read it, if you can come to the conclusions we came to, you smart enough to kind of come to that conclusion on your own. You don't need to be told by anybody. If you're like, nah, and this is why I think that that's not the case, you could say that too, because there's but when I read the story, that's what it is. Like in my head canon, that's what it is to me. And
so it's better for you. It's better for you if he is Lex.
Well, I don't know if it's better. It's more like an added bonus. Like if it is, because the story is just fine. If they're two separate characters, the story is still legit. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's good. But like in my head canon, they're the same guy, and that and I think they're both aware that they're the same guy. So it's not like one of these time travel things where somebody's looking at themselves and they're like, hey, I see a lot of myself in that guy. I don't think, you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's like both of them are aware of it. But also I kind of would always wonder why, because he's never shown up in any of the like current continuity or anything like that, has he?
No, he hasn't.
Yeah. So
maybe because he's still around as Lex Luthor. Even Morrison has never used him again.
Yeah, he's never used him again. So if he pop up, y'all got to cut the check. You know what I mean? Yeah, because we know how the message board stuff goes. So y'all got to cut the check if you use it. We got you. But yeah, I just in my head canon, that's exactly what it is.
You think so? Do you think it would be better? I guess the question there is, do you think it would be better if he was Lex inspired by Superman, or if he was somebody else with the potential of Lex inspired by Superman, whereas Lex was not inspired by Superman? So I guess that depends on how you would want to read that.
Yeah, you kind of see the potential for Lex's redemption at the end either way, don't you?
Yeah.
So either way, Lex has been moved up beyond his base instincts at the end, or at least has the potential of being moved up.
Yeah.
So whether he does become Leo or not, the message is still there.
You want to know an interpretation that could be completely cynical? Leo Quintum is the reason Superman is dead.
Could be that too. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't go there, but I know some folk that would. I put it like that. Yeah. But nah, that's interesting though. That, and somewhere somebody extracted that from it and was like, he killed Superman, so I guess it is Lex Luthor. You know what I mean?
That would be irony, wouldn't it? If he is Luthor and he succeeds in killing Luthor, but not on purpose. When he finally becomes good, he succeeds in killing Superman. Oh, do you know what's really interesting there is that one of the themes of the book is that we create Superman and Superman in turn creates us. And you see this with the infant universe that Superman is growing.
God, I love that issue.
Which is so beautiful.
Like All-Star Superman number 10, I felt going into All-Star Superman number 10, I was like, they're not going to have time to wrap everything up.
Mm.
Like there's so much more they could do, and then all of a sudden, All-Star Superman number 10 comes, happens, and I'm like, oh my god, I was wrong. They did
Yeah.
everything in this thing.
Yeah.
So in All Star Superman number 10, you see that Siegel and Schuster have created Superman. Superman creates an infinite universe in which the Earth
Uh-huh.
develops as it has for us, and Siegel and Schuster grow on this Earth and create Superman, and it goes in turn like that. So we create Superman as Superman creates us. That's kind of how it could be read as with Leo Quintum as well. Superman creates Leo Quintum by inspiring Lex Luthor to be something greater. And then at the end of it, Leo Quintum creates Superman 2, creates
Yeah.
his own Superman. So, yeah, again, you've got this idea of humanity's potential being realized by creating Superman. And I think that's such a wonderful thing. It's something Morrison's talked about in interviews. The idea of Superman being one of the greatest thing that humanity has created.
Yeah.
That just this idea that we could create something so beautiful as this idea, and in turn, this idea could make us better. It's absolutely wonderful.
And of course, that kind of cycle is like that is sun god stuff, isn't it, LaMar?
Yeah, it is. Because there's an element to like deities that are related to the sun. I think sometimes in older mythology it gets lost, but because they tend to kind of play it up, especially with Superman having that turn where because originally on Krypton, Kryptonians were just powerful beings like that, just naturally, but later on it got switched. So in older mythology, there's this element to it that, because we know, and it doesn't matter what your religion or what your belief system or whatever it is, if the sun drops out of the sky, that's it. You can hang it up. And that's the source of it, right? So just understanding the sun's importance to the perpetuation of life. And so you also know that from our perspective on Earth, the sun has stages. It has the rising, where it's the highest in the sky, and then when it sets. And there's different ways that story is told. And if you go throughout Superman's history, you'll see it play out, especially you think about Action Comics #1, that's when the sun is starting to set. You think about when he turns into this like character where he can pretty much, he's sneezing away galaxies and things like that. And that's like the sun at his highest point, and then you have his death where the sun sets, but then it starts over again. You know what I mean? So that's kind of it's a recurring thing. It's not just something that's one and done. That cycle continues. So that's one element of it, and you see it in this story, like what you were talking about how, when you first see him in his costume, he's in the sun. And when you see him at the end of it, he's in the sun. You see what I'm saying? So, it's a cycle that perpetuates. So, you see that, and it's a really interesting, it's interesting as an allegory, because that concept is interpreted in a lot of different ways through the different peoples of the world. But at the same time, there's core elements there that when you bring it out of Africa and then you bring it and then you take it like across the other parts of the world. And then finally, we have it here in the modern day with Superman, because he's a part of that too. We just don't think about it now because we're in the moment. But some things they stay the same.
It's about life and rebirth, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's interesting then, looking at Superman like that, is that it's almost like so many people, when they're in films particularly, they use Superman as a Christ allegory. But listening to you then, like Superman doing this in the Snyder films and all that.
Blatant.
And in Superman
every
Returns,
Superman film has been blatant about this.
Yeah. But listening to you then, LaMar, it just struck me how reductive it is to see Superman as just a Christ allegory. Right. Because Christ comes from this same sort of mythical origins of the cycle of death and rebirth that you were describing there, just as Superman does. Superman doesn't come from Christ. Christ and Superman come from the same mythical origins that you were describing. So to describe Superman as an offshoot of Christ is to really diminish him in a way. I hope that doesn't sound too blasphemous and
No.
insulting for any Christians watching. I don't mean it to. Like,
No, it's I feel you. It's like
We've spoken about this before, isn't it? Like, isn't
yeah.
isn't it basically a type of cultural appropriation, because he is supposed to be a Moses figure and not a Christ-like
Right.
figure.
He was intended to be, like a Moses figure, and then he gets elevated and they put all of that Christ imagery on it and stuff like that. But I would describe it like it would be kind of like me in my 40s trying to put on pants that I wore to school when I was in kindergarten. Like, they're my pants, they just don't fit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that I could fit in pants I wore when I was 5 years old, right? So it's kind of the same thing when you try to, you're putting it into a box it don't need to be in, right? Because the concept is kind of shifted and you can do more with it. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason why, when people try to write stories and create these stories about, and you run into it on the internet all the time about Jesus being in space and stuff like that, like, right, these fanatics and stuff, right? It's like, come on, man, like, there's a reason why that don't fly. But with Superman, that's a natural place for him, so nobody questions it, right? So when you try to, like you said, when you try to fit it within that framework, I mean, like, if you do it once or twice here or there, it's fine, because it's imagery. But when you try to base the character around that, he kind of loses something, and I know that that's not the intent, but he does, because it limits him in a way, because Superman is a character who's limitless more than any other character. He only has the limits you put on him. So, and that's kind of his thing. He's as powerful as he needs to be for the story, Yep. So, it kind of puts a cap on all of that if that's your go-to depiction of him, like, if I'm making sense. Yeah.
I'm just gonna take this time to really quickly plug, friends, if you want to see the differences between Superman and Jesus Christ, Second Coming from Ahoy Comics by Mark Russell, Richard Pace, and Leonard Kirk is the way to go.
Yeah, no question.
And doesn't the Superman guy in Second Coming have a big sun on his chest as well?
Oh, his name is Sunstar.
Oh yes, of course it is. Yeah.
But I think it is kind of a good comic to show the differences, like why Superman isn't Jesus. And one of the main reasons for that is because he spends way too much time punching stuff.
Right.
So, and because of that, I wouldn't want him to be Jesus. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Not that Jesus was above violence every now and then, but yeah. But speaking of inspiring people, in issue number 10, we got to talk about that moment, the most widely circulated moment from All-Star Superman on the internet, which is
right.
The one with a suicidal kid.
Yeah.
That one page is more famous than the entirety of All-Star Superman, and most people probably can't name where it's from. It's one of those pages that just gets shared around Facebook, around Twitter. What do you guys think of that moment?
Well, it kind of sums up All-Star Superman, doesn't it? Superman says to the girl, "You're stronger than you think you are." That's Superman's message to us. Superman isn't, I've got a friend who just likes to describe Superman in sort of really Nietzschean terms, and he's always saying, like, "Oh, how Nietzschean," when I share stuff about superheroes on social media. And it's like, Superman's not that. Just because he's called Superman, he's not this sort of Nietzschean vision, because
I love it.
That's funny. Because he's not. Because ultimately, what he's here to do is inspire us to reach the potential in ourselves, and ultimately, as Morrison reminds us, we created him, which is pretty amazing. And so, yeah, so that's his message to us. You're stronger than you think you are. You're capable of amazing things. Don't worry about it, you know? So it's a beautiful scene, and I'm glad that it's being shared so much.
LaMar?
LaMar, what do you think of it?
Well, I'll just say off the rip that from what I've been told, that scene has helped a lot of people through some stuff. And just for that alone is worth it. It's worth, it's worth it existing just for that. But also we're talking about the street level stuff, right? There's this element here where Superman kind of, so to speak, comes down out of the clouds, and he comes down to the earth, and he's doing, you know, the saving, getting cats out of trees type thing, comparatively to the other stuff. I mean, this guy, like in this book, he's doing all kind of crazy stuff, and that's in line with what Superman is. But things like this are also in line with what Superman is, because he basically tells this woman here, yeah, nah, when they called you and said that they were stuck in traffic, that's true. Because I saw them stuck in traffic. So, they're not lying to you. They really are trying to help you. Sometimes we need that reassurance, you know.
Yeah.
And so to be and what comics tend to do sometimes is they'll take an issue like mental health, and they'll either devote an issue to it or like a series to it or something like that. So when they did it here, it was just, you're just talking about, like, out of this larger story, you're just talking about a few panels. And when you go through those panels, nothing else needs to be said, you know? So for a guy, it shows Morrison's versatility, because he's taken all of this big stuff. And then within this big stuff, he just has this really, really, like, as far as scale, it's a small moment, but it might be the biggest moment in the book, you know?
Yeah.
And then he goes back out to the big stuff immediately, just like that. And he doesn't skip a beat with it. You know, this scene wouldn't have come off as well probably if somebody else was doing it, because there's a short list of writers who could have done it the way he did it and had it come off right without it feel like it's being shoehorned in or something. You know what I mean? And so, like, if you go back to like Superman, the movie with Christopher Reeve, that first one, they did a good job of that there, you know, in the sense of, like, you have Superman doing the street level stuff, and he's talking to the little girl, and and then he flies off, and then and all of that kind of stuff, But if you're going to do something like this, you have to nail it. Like, there's no room for error whatsoever, or else it comes off as preachy or ingenuine, and it can also be offensive to people who have those issues, So obviously that's not the response he got, obviously, because like you said, it's
Yeah.
everywhere,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a big factor here of show and not tell. So I can only think of,
Yeah.
I can think of like of a couple other Superman stories that deal with this kind of theme. Somebody being suicidal. So Paul, you've mentioned the one that Paul Chadwick did for a
Mhm.
Christmas special. That was really
Mhm.
good. It's
Yes.
basically just Superman talking, and he's just talking to the guy, right? He's not even trying to
Yeah,
talk
he
him
doesn't
down or
offer
anything.
him any answers. He
Yeah.
just offers him warmth and companionship, and that's all he offers. No answers, just that. And I think that's very beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Paul Chadwick is really good at that kind of stuff. And there was another one by a writer I am not particularly fond of with it. Um, it happened when Superman was doing a lot of walking. But see, that one came off as really preachy. So
Yeah, that one didn't work. No.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna say no names, but yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
say any names.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying you took it further than I was gonna take it. But yeah, I feel you though. Yeah.
JFK is dead, but Castro is alive. Shut up. But I think what makes this, what makes the Chadwick one really effective is they don't talk about the fairness of life or anything. They just talk about life. And what makes this one effective is there's barely any talking.
Yeah.
So is you're stronger than you think you are.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
Absolutely. So to wrap this up, then, I would say what I love about this is that this is a story from two guys who love Superman, and they are telling you, they're showing you rather, why Superman is so great. Like earlier on, I was saying about the common criticisms of Superman and how they're kind of answered in this. And Duy, you were talking about how people say Superman's too powerful, and this story is an answer to that. And I was talking about how people see Superman as this scary Nietzschean ideal that will solve all our problems for us and take away our agency. And this story is an answer to that. Every single criticism you can ever have about Superman is answered by this story, but it's not just a list of stuff. It's not like so many writers, I feel, just put their own voice into the dialogue bubbles and say Superman's great because of this, Superman's great because of that, and it's not a proper story. This is a proper story in its own right.
Yeah.
So it's not just a list of why Superman is great. So that's why I love this story so much. It truly is like the perfect Superman story. So what do you guys think? Why do you love it so much, LaMar?
I was going to say, even some of the greatest writers of all time are not immune to kind of explicitly putting their voice into this character. And I think Grant showed a lot of restraint in that for these issues.
Yeah. I think that trying to take, because you talk like the world is a much different place now than it was in the 60s. And this book takes all of the ways in which it's different and puts it on full display, and the ways in which it's the same and puts it on full display. And that's a very tall order, especially when you're doing it in 12 issues, right? And then each issue by itself feels like a story, right? And so, and like we were saying at the beginning, you have these different arcs, and then within the different arcs, you have these stories, and like you can almost read them just by themselves, and it makes perfect sense. So there's a lot of narrative flexibility here, and when you go to the end and you read it, it's just the payoff is huge. That's the reason why we're still talking about it. Because if there was only like 2 or 3 good issues, we probably would just be talking about those 2 or 3 good issues and then just discarding the rest. But for a story, yeah, or just we wouldn't be talking about it at all. So, but for a story like this to hit it out of the park on so many beats, and a lot of it is because of the creative team was a thing, and that's a big part of it too. So you can't have, like you're talking about putting their own voices in it. Like you can't have these diametrically opposed ideas about all of these characters and get a book like this. Like you have to be on the same page. And over the course of 12 issues, having it, there's no real dip in the quality of the book itself, because each issue ends on a note and then it picks up someplace else. So you got something to look forward to, So, I appreciate the craft that went into it, but at the same time, having the craft gel with just a genuine love of the characters, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
The best stories are told when you just genuinely love the character. So this book pretty much delivers on everything possible, and it gets most of it right. And I'm saying right loosely, right? So it's just an amazing book from start to finish. Like if you love Superman, it's a good book. If you've never read Superman before and you want to see what the hype is about, it's a good book. If you've never read comics before, it's a good book. If you're into more like literary stuff, it's a good book. You know what I mean? So it's just like you just can't go wrong reading this book. Like you could literally pick it up and flip to any page and pick up and start reading, and you'll get something that's going to make you want to read the rest of it.
Absolutely.
If you're into fine art, it's a good book. And what I mean by that is, there's so many images in this book that if a classical painter decided to take those images and paint them, they would make complete sense. Superman kisses Lois on the moon. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Superman arm wrestles Atlas and Samson because they want to impress a girl. That's beautiful. Uh, Superman plays fetch in space with his dog with a giant tree. Right? That's beautiful. And Superman fixes the sun in the middle of the sun. That's beautiful because you got, you have all of that stuff. It's mythical, it's fantastic, it's big, and it's also really, really human.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what really sets this book apart from so many other things, even the best Superman stories that also try to do that. That's really what sets All Star apart. There's nothing, and also like there's Superman doesn't have like a fatal flaw here. Like, so there's so many Superman stories where, like we spoke about this, the Justice League cartoon, where he had, his hubris gets in the way and he has to get over it. Kingdom Come is the same way. That's a video we still have to do. Even other Superman stories, he loses his powers or whatever. In this one, it's just like he's being Superman, and it's going, he's and being Superman is what's going to get him through his problems, and it's also the cause of his problems. So it's mythical. I would say it's probably the best Superman story ever. It's right up there.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, anything to add at the end of that from anyone? No. Well,
No.
I think we can
Think-
thoroughly recommend this. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so check this book out and click like, subscribe, and follow us. And please share this video and please comment on it and let us know what you think of All Star Superman and our analysis of it. Thank you very much, everyone.
You want to talk about this with us? Go to facebook.com/group/thecomicscube. So talk about
Thank you very
Superman.
much.
Awesome. Yeah.